Hello, good evening. Welcome. I told you. Well, maybe we should move it back. Uh, Boycott City Market Week 12. I feel like it's leaned in forward. Let me know how the audio sound. The audio, try to check it, but the audio should sound good. But just comment, leave a comment. Let me know how the audio sounds. Yeah, I think we just need to be back further. Or we need to be scooted back. So this is week 12 of the city market season, week 12 of hosting an event that directly protested city market. And this week, week 12, we decided to do something different. And in the effort of full transparency, the effort of complete honesty, one of the main reasons we decided to do something different was because we felt up until this point, up in the first 11 weeks, we felt the main goal, the main focus point of the protest was trying to maintain some type of presence, to making sure we were physically present and to make sure people could see us and see the signs and hear us as best as they could at the city market protest. Now it felt like the time to just be more direct of things, to take a little bit more of a direct action, to be more physically present during the city market season. So what we did is, what's that street called? It's Madison?
Yeah,
It's First and Madison. Is First and Market. We went down to where the Holy Trinity Church is, that crosswalk up the street from the Trinity Church, and we walked that crosswalk. And one of the main sentimental reasons for me personally was because a year ago tomorrow, was the first time I was arrested. And the first time I was arrested was for walking in a crosswalk. The first time I was arrested, I was walking in the crosswalk right across from City Market, and I had asked Carla something, like Carla read something. I had asked her, like, I forget, some question about why something happened, and she just didn't answer me. I was asking why were people arrested for walking the cross, something like that, and she didn't answer me. So I continued to walk, and that is when she had said some form of "get him," and then I continued to walk in the crosswalk, which is well within my legal right to walk into the crosswalk. And Jeremiah Cesarli arrested me. And for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are unaware, Jeremiah Cesarli is one of the officers who murdered Logan Bear, who shot that 18-year-old boy 16 times. So that was just more of a personal reason for me why I feel like we should return to more direct action, and that is walking in the crosswalk. And overall, it was definitely going into doing, when you do new direct action, you can prepare as best as you can, but you can never be fully prepared for the things that may happen. So I'm gonna pass it to you. Was just general thoughts of how it went. The first time doing something new, first time trying something out. Doing something new, but also doing something old.
I think that we definitely elicited a lot of familiar responses when it comes to disruptive actions. So when you have an effective action, something that people just can't miss, people can't overlook, you can't, if you're being stopped at an intersection, or you're having to stop at an intersection for people who are walking through the crosswalk, like, the fact that you stopped, you've already acknowledged that there's somebody walking in front of your car. So you can't, turn a blind eye or just not look in the direction of the people who are out there protesting, because it's right in front of you. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with, him saying that we went out there to do something a little different, but also something that's old, because us being, tucked away in a corner, us hiding behind a wall, not hiding behind a wall, but us having, space behind a wall on the outskirts of City Market. It's easy to just, if you're standing in line for the food truck that's right there in front of where we would normally be, like, you don't even have a line of sight. A lot of people that stand there, regardless of what the police saying about people being alarmed and disturbed about the megaphones and things like that, you really can't even hear what's going on. A lot of people say you can't even hear with the food truck, with the generator going, with the music going. People tell us, all the time they're standing behind that truck 20 feet away from us and they can't hear, what we're saying. So I think a big part of that too is with us moving, changing up tactics for this week. I think a big part of that is, we're forcing people to see us. You're not going to hide behind a food truck. You're not going to go to the other side of City Market. Like, once you pull up to that intersection, there's no way you're not going to see us. Like, you're going to see us. If you're walking, yeah. If you're walking through in the intersection on your way to or from City Market or on your way to or from one of these restaurants and you see us, like, there's no way you're just going to look down and count your toes. Like, you are going to see us. So I think that a lot of, the tactic was for to force people to see us, to force people to look at us, to force people to see the signs, to force people who, have to stop because somebody is crossing the street, to force them for 10 seconds or whatever the case is, to force them to hear about Denzel, to hear about Tyrus, to hear about, Logan Bell, to hear about Michael Seiko Jr., to hear about, the people that we come out here to talk about, to speak on. So it forces them to see us. It forces them to hear us. And so, that was a big, I don't know, win or a big, key reason that the change occurred. And it definitely elicited expected responses on one hand, but it's never responses that you want to hear. It's never things that you want to encounter, things that you want to have to be involved in hearing. So it was a lot of, get a job, which protesters aren't unfamiliar to hear. It was a lot of people trying to act like they're going to hit somebody with their car. It was a lot of, people think that they're really going to do something, either mumbling under their breath or, trying to talk shit as they're walking away, but not really trying to do anything. It was a lot of just ignorance in general. A lot of people that are just ignorant to the situation. And then there was even a couple of slurs, which
many. I go so far as to say many.
I heard two. I heard hard R, which I'm not gonna obviously say it for two reasons. One being I don't want the video pulled down, and two, I'm not gonna give validity to it. But yeah, that was heard on two occasions. One of the people who said it actually, either he went home or he drove down the street and parked his car, changed his shirt, and
General.
oh, okay, we doing real general. We doing real general. That's my bad. So generally, we heard a lot of different familiar things that we have heard, which, was almost to be expected, but at the same time, like, it's never like a comfortable feeling, even as the protester, even though we have each other's back, even though we keep us safe. It's never a comfortable situation to have people who are driving in cars either try to weaponize their vehicles or disregard what we're saying. But I think that it just goes to show how adamant we are about spreading this message and how crucial it is to bring awareness to these situations, because people would rather go off the rails or scream, expletives or slurs or whatever, or just completely ignore it altogether than really address the issues. So I think that us putting ourselves in a position to be seen and heard in places that people aren't necessarily expecting it, and places that people aren't necessarily wanting it, to be honest. Like, I think that it was a good idea. I think it was a good tactic for us to utilize.
Okay, and I'm passing to you the same question. Just general takeaways, because again, going to something new, it's certain things that you can expect. That you can expect the slurs, you can expect these people coming by and being to a point to where they're almost violent, and that's sadly that is expected. Sadly, that is something that we got to prepare for. Sadly, those are those things. But it almost feel like part of what feels like we're doing down there is we're exposing these issues and highlighting these issues to where people come by and they stick their head out their window and they say these slurs. Where that's something that people have always thought. It's just now that it's getting a highlight on it. Now it's getting a light on it. So what's your general takeaway, just overall?
I think as far as the general takeaway is that it was different from the other protests, being as far as location, but being back in the crosswalk, just the psychology of it for people, whether they were just driving or trying to park, is just the general sense of that moment of a slight inconvenience, I guess. That's really the only way I can say it. Maybe you took an extra 5 seconds at the crosswalk to pull off. So a minor inconvenience. Minor inconvenience, and then highlight that word minor.
Legal.
Right.
Legal inconvenience. Nothing we did was illegal.
Exactly. Walking a crosswalk, you yield the right of way to pedestrians. That's just how it works. And again, to stress the obvious, but it's not obvious. I don't want to make the assumption that people understand what is obvious or what isn't, but just the obvious point that it was a peaceful protest. Now, some may argue by being petty. Well, what do you mean peaceful? Well, in the grand scheme of things, this was textbook peaceful. I mean, you don't have a group in Rockford that are beating people up randomly or throwing rocks or lighting fires. You have people that are protesting to get a point across. So my general takeaway from being down there was, it provoked a response. But per person, which I do want to make this statement now in this general comment, per person, it was a matter of how they chose to internalize the moment. It was obvious that you saw pictures of victims that were shot. It was obvious that you could hear it audibly, clearly, through the volume, that it was specifically about people that were wrongfully either murdered at the hands of police or shot unarmed. So all this was obvious. It wasn't like it was a confusing moment. But then it was the responses were drawn out by how other Rockfordians, how other Rockford citizens internalized the moment, where they were literally confronted with us and being confronted with this moment. So I thought overall it was very successful.
And it did. I don't want to get to a point to where we get too far ahead of ourselves and call it a win. But it did feel like there was a moment where a police car had pulled up to the side of the street, where Assistant Deputy Chief Joe Givens had drove past and had actually turned into City Market and was almost part of the protest going into City Market. So it did feel like as more police officers arrived that something may happen. But again, it's important to recognize and important to repeatedly state that what was being done is well within our legal rights. Nothing to anybody who has an opinion of, oh, just go ahead and arrest them. I want you to go ahead and take a look at how many cases have been dropped from last year. How many cases have been dismissed from last year? Because they are fully aware and have full knowledge of what is being done is not within their legal rights, or what the arrests that they are making, they're not legal arrests. It's clearly unlawful and unjust arrest, the brutalization that took place. So before we go any further in talking about things that took place this year, I want to just take that look back at what happened a year ago. And just a year ago today, it was chaos. There's the only way I could describe it. August 7th of 2020 was chaos. It was the first time I had, to me, where my mindset was. I had attended a lot of the initial protests and the die-ins and things like that, but then I was trying to figure out things with school and other things. And so I had stopped, but then I had seen the arrests that took place on July 31st, and I had seen the events that took place on August 1st at the Black the Blue Rally, and it got into my mind of, okay, I'm not gonna be silent no more. I'm not gonna just sit at home and not do nothing. One of the things that was said today was, history's gonna ask you, where did you stand when these things has happened? Where did you stand while people were being brutalized by the police? Where did you stand while City Market was infringing on people's human rights? Where did you stand when those things occurred? And then I have those same thoughts a year ago, and I decided, okay, it's time for me to act. So I went into the protest, and Leslie had, I will say, Leslie did say before there was any arrest that we don't know what happened. There was arrest last week. By walking this crosswalk, you may get arrested. So I knew full well that you may get arrested for walking this crosswalk. But a thing that I try to keep in mind during this is what will get you arrested and what may get you arrested. And those are two different things. Right. Those are two different things. What may get you arrested is something that infringes on your rights as a person. There's no crime or law that say you can't walk in a crosswalk. There's no crime or law that say there's a limit to how many times you walk in a crosswalk. Well within our legal rights to walk in the crosswalk. What is it? State law. Stop for pedestrians in the crosswalk. So everything that we have done up until this point has been well within our legal rights. So any arrests that come from this would be a violation of those rights. So, and again, to go back to a year ago, to August 7th, I was arrested, but you was arrested as well. What was your thoughts on that? Just looking back and to the same place to where we looked back a year ago last week was the first arrest of City Market. Now it's a year ago last year, and it's 2 weeks in a row for you. So what's your mindset?
I think that being arrested in itself is a traumatic experience. So going back to relive those same scenarios, I don't blame anyone for being afraid to have to go through that again. It's not a situation that people are eager to put themselves into to begin with, and definitely not a situation that anybody would be eager to put themselves back into. So I think kind of being back in that situation, like, I felt a little better just like knowing kind of what to expect from other people, but honestly not knowing what to expect from the police gave me a little bit of anxiety, because it was like every time they would be forming up, or every time, you know, you'd see one of them get on the phone and be talking on the phone. And from experience, specifically this city market season, you see them on the phone, like you can almost assume that what's coming very soon afterwards is an arrest. So I think that kind of like seeing them trying to formulate, I think that this being the first week that we did this, it kind of threw them off. And so I think that, you know, if we were to do the same thing next week, they may you know, have different ideas. But for this week, I think that
it's a week-to-week thing.
Yeah,
we are not.
Yeah,
set.
we're not.
We're not tied to anything.
We fluid. We like water. I'm really just there. You know, something happens, and they're like, all right. So for the next week, this is how we're gonna address that situation if it happens again. So I think with us having like done something new, it kind of threw a wrench in their regular, like, oh yeah, they're gonna be where they're at, and you know, if anybody uses a megaphone, then, well, this is how we're going to address that. And if this happens, like, this is how we're going to address that. But for us to be doing something new this week, I think it, you know, it helped in the way that it was unexpected. And so they weren't quick to respond. They were quick to, like, you know, see if they can do something, but once it became clear that they weren't necessarily going to do anything about it, then I feel like we all kind of relaxed a little bit and was able to, okay, so we're just walking in a crosswalk, very normal stuff. We've done this before, and it has gotten a very different response. But it looks like, you know, after we're out there an hour and a half and nothing's changed. We're out there 2 hours and nothing's changed. We're out there 2.5 hours and nothing's changed. And we're like, okay, we're going to be out here, you know, a half hour more. We can almost, you know, just completely relax and just, you know, I guess relax off of the idea that the police are going to come and arrest us, and just address, you know, the people in the vehicles or the people that are heckling us or what have you. Like, at that point, we can just address that and kind of relax a little bit, you know, about having our heads on a swivel, trying to make sure nobody's hitting us with the car, but also trying to make sure we're not being ambushed by 36 police while we have, you know, a dozen protesters. So I think that there were some, you know, pros and cons, and there's going to be a pro and a con, or pros and cons to every action. But it felt like for this action specifically, you know, if we were able to get over the traumatic experience and the PTSD of having been arrested, and it being the year, you know, almost year anniversary of us being arrested, and, you know, the fact that some of us are still going to court from it, like, I think that if we can get over that, which is a lot to have to get over, I think that we can, you know, just get to the core of what we're doing out here, which is protesting police brutality and racial injustice.
Now, I want to throw the same question towards you. What a year ago, August 7th, during City Market, it's the second week of arrest. It's less than a week after Back the Blue. So, what did you say? Hold on. What's going on? Okay. So the scene where a year ago where it's police officers invading the so-called designated protest zone, people being assaulted in the designated protest. Women, non-binary folks being assaulted in this designated protest zone. So what's your thoughts to seeing that a year ago?
Being there, being present personally, as I said in many other lives, when I speak on a first-person basis. I'm not speaking through someone else talking to me or something that someone else said or something that someone else saw. I speak from a vantage point of being down here last year, and also being directly between the protesters, in the sense that I was not a liaison or a go-between, but I made it a point to always speak directly to whoever was in charge. Why? Because I saw in many instances across the country, because of the national media coverage, I already knew that the story, the media was spinning a story deliberately on all major networks that the protests were violent, but I was seeing evidence constantly to the contrary. And by the end of the protest season, the federal government conveniently put out an article stating that I believe it was 95% of all protesting last year in 2020 was nonviolent, and that most of the violence was from white anarchist groups, white nationals, and the police deliberately causing incidents in many of the cities as flashpoints, that it was documented from the federal government that these incidents were caused and provoked by racists, the vast majority of them. It was to suit an agenda and a narrative. And again, this is not my opinion. This is the FBI did a whole investigation on this, and they were tracking recruitment of white supremacists in police force nationally. So for anyone saying I back the police and every member, to have a blanket statement like that is dangerous, because obviously if the federal government is tracking white supremacist recruitment in the police force nationally and they're saying it's continuing to rise, what you're actually saying is I support the Klan, I support white nationalists, I support murderers, I support people with homicidal tendencies, or I support racists, because that's what you're saying. If the police force are directly recruiting in the ranks officers to be... Oh. No problem. That if they're going through the lengths to recruit white supremacists, then obviously for someone to just throw out that, back to blue, regardless, blah, 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 what you're saying is you support a racist that deliberately put on a police badge, but still determined in his mind and his heart to remain a racist. He just wants more power or more leverage under the law to be a racist with a badge now. So that's why I'm not gung-ho to back the blue and all this other stuff, because it is federal. The FBI has already stated, and anyone watching can pull up this article, they are recruiting within police forces. So I don't feel that Illinois is exempt from white supremacist sympathizers or even white supremacists on police forces here. And what comes to my mind from last year is the excessiveness of where the police kept saying, well, Minneapolis, or Portland, or New York. And they were bringing up instances where I had rebuttals saying, but yeah, it was the officers in New York that were shooting people in the face, though, with rubber bullets. They weren't shooting at the ground to make them ricochet up. They were shooting them in the face. People lost eyes. People are permanently scarred and damaged from getting the one girl that got shot in the middle of her forehead. They deliberately were bloodthirsty. And now the ramifications to back my point, because I know a lot of people, when they hear this stuff, they want to be dismissive and say, oh, that's your opinion. I'm not talking about opinion. New York City has a class action lawsuit against the city and the police force for excessive force and how they handled protesting last year. Minneapolis, I believe, has the same thing. Portland has the same thing. So if Rockford locally is saying that they were copying and emulating these other cities, because what you saw here was a ramped up police force watching video and watching tactics in other major cities, and all these other major cities are now in lawsuits because of excessiveness. But you have a city like Rockford that at the end of the fiscal year, I believe it was the Justice Center, got an additional $3 million. There was no defunding. And I believe RPD had almost close to $2 million. Almost $3 million as well. And there was $500,000 in overtime for the year. But this time last year, what I remember was the anxiousness of the police to really clamp down on the protesters. And there were many times when I'd say, who's in charge? And they'd just point because they didn't want to speak. They direct me to the main officer. Again, I dealt with the main officer because it cuts down on any confusion from what they're getting. It's all direct information. So to talk to the top officer, and they say, well, we just want to make sure things remain peaceful, and we don't want it to be like, and they would mention some big situation where buildings were on fire in some other city or whatnot, and I'd always remind them, I'd say, well, you do realize that when City Market is over, if someone didn't know that people actually walked in a crosswalk here by someone telling them that, there's no reference that anything happened here. So I said, as much as you feel that this is not the case, you have on your hands a peaceful protest. There are no fires in Rockford. There are no bricks being thrown through people's windows. None of these stores had to board up. Taco Betty's is intact. The Standards is intact. No anti-protesters were hurt, stabbed, shot, or wounded. You had people exercising their First Amendment rights, but being brutalized in the process with excessiveness. I mean, don't let it slip by that 3 children, were pepper sprayed last year. The sheriff department is overtly quiet about it. The mayor's administration is quiet about it. RPD is quiet about it. They don't want to touch that story because they know children were involved. Look what happened in Rochester, New York, when a child was pepper sprayed. It set off a chain of events because it was a child, the girl that was pepper sprayed in the backseat of the police car. Rockford is so used to police officers not being reprimanded for irreprehensible actions that when it comes to the case of children, it's my hope that people viewing, and as that case materializes, that people aren't desensitized to the fact that they were children. And then before people say, well, they should have never been down there, the police showed every person that was down there a map of the protest zone and directed them where to stand when they eventually, within I think 30 minutes, brutalized them in that space. This is a fact. This is a fact. They showed them this is your safe zone. You had the wall of moms. These women didn't have pepper spray. They were there to observe, and they were there in support of what was happening, to stand in solidarity, because again, to paint the picture, you had cases that were ramping up to become very national. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, they were gaining momentum on an international level. So you had the wall of moms and other people and other children that were in this space. So all of this took place around that time. So that's just to paint a picture of what was happening in Rockford at that time last year. What I think of when I think of August is excessiveness and police excessively creating this boogeyman scenario when it never materialized in Rockford, because that was never the crowd that they were dealing with. But yet, before I pass the mic, I do want to say this again, but yet $500,000 was spent in overtime in taxpayers' money for the same 30 people that were here every week. The first week, when they rerouted traffic, the first 2 weeks, there were only 6 officers on the scene. By the end of City Market, there were anywhere from 40 to 60 officers that were, in many cases, they were racking up overtime, and that money was easily spent by good old Rockford.
Okay.
Oh shit! Oh, my leg like baby tears.
When There was a moment, like she said, where police officers may have had more of a presence. They had more of a presence in there, and again, it is important to keep in mind that everything we were doing was legal, well within our legal rights. And my fault, I wasn't able to listen to you talk. You just talked mainly about last year. How were you?
Yeah. Just basically what last year meant, where it was always the assumption of excessiveness by trying to compare Rockford to other cities that had different dynamics going on. Me talking directly to the officers. This is not a secondhand story. Yeah. Me telling the top officers, Carlin Red and other officers that were the top officers on the scene, this is not, and then I would just make a list of other cities. This is not Minneapolis. This is not Portland. This is not New York City. This is not Buffalo. This is not Rochester. You're comparing this city with an assumptive attitude and demeanor of an assumptiveness to warrant excessiveness. And that is not their job to make assumptions. Their job is to compile the information and make a determination. But what we had was a clear case for the entire protest season in Rockford was assumptiveness of terror or extremism or attempted or potential murder. I mean, it was laughable then, and it's laughable now in hindsight. But when people were saying, well, people can die here, and I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You have people walking across crosswalk. Well, you never know. And I said, yes, I do know, because I know these people. They are taxpayers. They are college students. Some of these people that are protesting have 2 jobs. They have children. They have wives. They have husbands. They have fiancés, boyfriends, girlfriends. They're citizens. They're citizens first. And they're citizens that came out here because they were angry of police brutality, racial profiling, and excessive force. It's that simple. You didn't have domestic terrorists. Now, the white supremacists, according to the federal government, white supremacists are the #1 group in America as far as domestic terrorism in the country. The #1 threat for on the FBI list is white supremacy. White supremacists are the #1 domestic terrorist group in America. So for anyone looking at me saying, "Oh well, it's a form of terrorism," how? I'm standing up for people that have been gunned down, and they were unarmed. I don't even want to share the same space with someone that's going to attempt with all their might to justify someone being gunned down or shot who's unarmed. That's something I don't want to hear in any conversation. That's like someone looking back at black and white photos of lynchings and saying, "Well, he had to have done something wrong to deserve that." That's not how that works. You don't victimize the victim yet again. But again, that's what we were seeing today was the victims being victimized. I mean, the level of racism that I saw, I'm not shocked at, and I'm going to tell you why. Last year, before I got involved, before I took off my suit and tie and got involved, because I am also a business consultant and a businessman, but I was so passionate about wanting to see the entire city move forward. The entire city. The city cannot leave its black community or Latino community in the dust and hope to move forward and have a better, promising city when you leave your minority community behind. It's not possible. And that's why I got involved. And people want to understand the reasoning or my motivation to get involved. I want to see all of Rockford move forward. I have love for my Latino brothers and sisters, my Hispanic brothers and sisters. God bless you. I have love for the white community, believe it or not. We collectively, cohesively need to move forward. This is not a black versus white thing. But what I will say is this. I stand against those that stand against me. And what I mean by that is there are those that hate me simply because I'm black. My anger is justified for who those who are racist and those who are violent. I'm gonna wait for these motorcycles to go by. Sorry about that. To those that are racist, see, that's the dividing line right there. And that struck me when I saw these people out here using racial slurs. I was thinking, I hope people understand this dynamic. There are people that were provoked to anger simply because they hate black people and people of color. My anger is a justified anger because I'm standing against people that are I'm standing against people that are standing against people that are standing up for equality and justice. Now, to me, that's a complete irony. We have white people attacking us verbally just because they're racist. But we were standing for the sake of speaking against inequality. Is that they white lives have always mattered in America, but white lives were the ones killing Native Americans. White lives were the ones lynching black people. White lives were the ones lynching black people. I sailed the 17 for you black. Great, that's great. Bravo. There is not a moment in the history of America that white lives have never mattered. And that here again is another dose of white fragility. The moment a black person says their life matters, you have white people that are so insecure that they have to say, but white lives matter. America was founded on white supremacy. When have white lives never mattered in this country? Ever. In the history of this country. White lives have mattered to the point where they slaughtered millions of Native Americans. America had its own Holocaust. America slaughtered millions of Native Americans. For the sake of white lives mattering, it was the proof that our lives matter so much that we will slaughter as many indigenous people as we can. Almost 90% of the indigenous people of the Americas, as far as America and Canada, almost 90% of the indigenous people were slaughtered. Then when you say, well, white lives in regards to black lives, black people have never gone out lynching white people. That's not a phenomenon in America. That is as American, as perverse as it is, that's as American as apple pie, because America was founded on white supremacist ideology. It was founded on that. There are more Americans now embracing whiteness than they are embracing their European heritage. I'll say that again, because I know it went over some people's head. They're so used to calling themselves white because they're indoctrinated into whiteness from childhood that they barely understand how to embrace their ethnicity and their cultural roots by identifying with being European. The cast off to that is, well, I'm a mutt. It doesn't matter. You're still European. You have a background, you have a culture, you have an ethnicity, you have a language. Whiteness is not an ethnicity. It's not a heritage. It is not a language. Whiteness is a construct. It is a social and economic construct to benefit those who are deemed white. White was created when white supremacy was created. What were we then prior to that? You were Europeans. And then when it was created an economic axis of power, because if you have somebody that's superior, by default, the structure of it is everyone else is inferior, and ultimately you have somebody at the base. But you have to put yourself at the top. You have a hierarchy and a structure that is contrived and created to place people in a certain ranking for the sake of keeping and preserving whiteness and white supremacy on an economic, social, political level. But the irony of life is this. The irony of life is this. White supremacy is the most prolific, unfounded, through any scientific evidence, it's the most prolific, unfounded military, economic, and social construct known to man. It has proliferated the entire globe. Every nation has been impacted by it. Every continent has been impacted by it. Every group of people on the world, in this world, have been impacted by it. That's how prolific white supremacy has been in this world. Now, why am I saying that? Why am I saying this? Because we live in a nation where the moment at any time in history black people have talked about equality or justice, there's always this loud surge of but always cancels out whatever precedes it. So there is no but when a black person says, but what about my equality and what about my justice? The moment someone gets fragile or insecure, says, but hold on. They're acknowledging that it isn't, that doesn't exist. But their fear is, but what if you do get it? What does that mean for me? Well, if you have a superiority has no room for equality because it places one above everyone else. So people are wondering, well, why can't we kumbaya it out and just hug it out? White supremacy won't allow equality. And I hope you understand what I'm saying. On a social, economic, and political level, white supremacy does not allow the room for equality because it's about superiority. So once you start talking equality, either the group that you are subjugating comes up to where you are because of equality, or you debase yourself to come down socially, economically, to a level where everyone comes up collectively together. And that's not the construct that we live in. That's not the construct in what we live in. We live in a construct, a created reality. This is a virtual reality. The reality that I live in America as a black man is that it is assumed that I have to prove that I'm equal to someone else. But in real life, it's the fact of the matter is that I was born equal to every human being on the face of the earth.
We got some other things going on. We're gonna end this live.
Okay.